Hi. My office is a mess, so just ignore it. Today I'm going to be talking about a video that Let's Be Clear with London Storm reacted to, because the only way I would have seen that original video is if somebody else was talking about it for reasons that will become apparent in a moment. I saw BigNik in the thumbnail, so I knew it was going to be something. So that's what we'll be talking about today. If you're not already familiar, BigNik, or Nick Kaswani, is a Viner, YouTuber, and now TikToker who uploaded his first video to the internet on January 28, 2014, and was a frequent flyer on David Dobrik's Vlog Squad. He's originally from Florida and grew up splitting his time between Illinois and California, and started posting videos on Vine when he was recovering from leg surgery, which eventually gained him enough of a following to make videos with other popular Viners at the time, like King Bach and Brent Rivera. But let's not get bogged down in the specifics of who he is as an individual, because it's ultimately immaterial to what the whole video is about. So many people like iNabber, Chad, Ryan Beard have already made videos covering who Nick is as a person and the kind of things that he says where people can see and hear him. Me adding my video into the mix will not be shedding much light on him as an individual. However, I do want to talk about how he and others like him contribute to a larger ecosystem of Christian vloggers who are more concerned with culture war slap fighting than they are with actually being a good person or following the teachings of the Christian God. Around 2017, he started posting more about his walk with Christ, and on its own, this is perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. I have my own blog where I talk about something similar. We are both allowed to do that. The issue is that the content that he makes, whether it be videos or music, is more about virtue signaling to other conservatives than it is about an actual profession of faith in the Christian God. Since 2017, BigNik has been positioning himself firmly in the camp of conservatives. Since 2017, BigNik has positioned himself firmly in the camp of conservative culture warriors. Like, his TikTok feed is rife with videos saying feminism is evil, vaccines are evil, and all music except for his is evil, which he calls worldly music. But I feel like that's been discussed by a multitude of other people, so we're just using it as a jumping off point to talk about another problem. In a video titled Ex-Warlock Reveals Shocking Truth About the Agenda Against Christians, Nick talks about James Kawalia, a man claiming to be an ex-Satanist and high-ranking African warlock, which I would love to see some proof for, but it is tendered neither by James nor Nick, so fuck that, I guess. But I'm not really going to be talking about James. I'm going to try and stick to Nick and the things that he is taking away from what James is saying, as well as examining the way that Nick and others like him use fear to sort of scare the public into following them. Spoiler alert, for the entirety of the interview, he says fucking nothing. The entirety of the interview, he's just sitting there, not saying anything, grimacing and making faces. It's a special kind of lazy that gets me so pissed. Like, for all this, can you at least pretend to make some meaningful commentary? Or you can't even be bothered to give an actual response to what he's saying. Grow up. First, after the clip is over, he references Jude 23, further referencing James Kawalia's statements about, quote, spiritual nakedness, and then says that mainstream religious leaders don't talk about this anymore. He also says that witches and warlocks are planning day in and day out to pick Christians off one by one, but does not at all specify how. But the specifics are not really the point. The point is to scare you into coming to God, or else a witch and or warlock is going to hit you with the JFK edition Eldritch Blast. It's to instill you with an ever-present anxiety that can only be assuaged by evangelism and following people like Nick. What this is an appeal to force and proof by intimidation. Appeal to force, also called argumentum ad baculum, is defined by Lander University as the fallacy committed when one makes an appeal to force to bring about the acceptance of a conclusion, and is categorized as when one emphasizes the negative consequences of holding one contrary position, regardless of the contrary position's truth value, or also called logical value, particularly when the argument maker themselves causes or threatens to cause those negative consequences. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, published by Stanford University, gives the example of person A saying that if person B doesn't join person A's demonstration against the expansion of a park, that person A will evict person B from their apartment, which means that person B should join the demonstration. In the context of Nick's video, he is person A telling the viewer, person B, that if they don't do what he says, that their eternal soul will be damned for all eternity, which means that person B should just do what he says. Proof by intimidation is rooted in a joke phrasing in the field of mathematics, where a person will hand-wave away an argument as not even needing to be discussed, and then overload their speech with things that you wouldn't be able to understand unless you had actually talked about the thing that they hand-waved away. In an article titled Cogno-Intellectualism, Rhetorical Logic, and the Krasky-Trump Method for the Annals of Improbable Logic, Michael Wilkinson categorized summarizes proof by intimidation this way. It attempts to intimidate the audience into simply accepting the result without evidence by appealing to their ignorance and lack of understanding. In the context of Nick's video, Nick is hand-waving away the discussion of James Kowalia's claims as inherently true, without considering that this may not be the case. He then overloads the viewer with terms like churchianity and spiritual garments without ever explaining them, which would have been necessary to address if he had actually conducted a critical examination of what James Kowalia said, instead of spending the whole time making faces like a fucking child. Grow up. We can see this when he references Revelation 16:15, and cautions the viewer against, quote, giving your garments to demons, stating that, quote, Jesus is coming back soon, and doing so would be, quote, very risky. Essentially what he's telling you is that if you get caught slipping for even a single second, you'll get thrown into super hell like Castiel in the Supernatural series finale. He's not explaining how one gives their garments to demons or why it's risky to do so. He's depending on the fear that comes along with that mental image in order to force the audience to follow his guidance. He literally says the end of the age is closer than you could even imagine. Even a tiny bit of compromise is all Satan needs to capture your soul eternally. And then says that we have to go from, quote, churchianity to Christianity, which is a level of anxiety I cannot ever imagine living with. Also, what on Lily Gladstone's green earth is churchianity? He doesn't define it, he just assumes that the viewer already understands it. This just goes back to proof by intimidation, which depends on misdirecting the viewer's attention away from the core of the issue that he's pretending to give meaningful commentary on. Now you might be wondering, how could I recognize this as fear-mongering? And the answer is, I experienced it firsthand. However, I don't want to claim that my experience constitutes empirical evidence, but because Nick doesn't offer any kind of proof to the claims that he's making, and merely offers James Kowalia's firsthand experience as empirical evidence, I feel like that gives me a little bit of wiggle room to discuss my perspective in relation to the blatant scare tactics that he's using. I grew up going to an evangelical Christian school, kindergarten to 8th grade, and most, if not all, of the religious instruction that we got was centered around the idea that if we make even the slightest mistake, that we will be paying for it for the rest of our lives, and then some. It was pretty vague in general as we were little kids, but as we got older, it got more specific and frightening. We went from being taught that God and Jesus love us unconditionally to being taught that God is jealous, angry, and their love is conditional. If we fucked up even once, we had to spend the rest of our natural lives making amends for it and carrying it on our back, showing it to every single person that we met. Awesome lesson to learn at 11 years old. Very cool.
Oh, by the way, I was being sarcastic.
The best example I can give of this is something that we called social issues classes. Social issues classes encompass 3 topics: drugs and alcohol, sex, and gay people. In the 6th grade, we covered drugs and alcohol and spent half our day watching testimonials of people who went to one party in high school, drank a single cup of alcohol, or were in the same room as weed, and it immediately ruined their lives permanently. Our teacher stressed that, much like what Nick says, if you slip up even one time, you are permanently damned to hell with no way out. Could you imagine hearing that at like 11 years old? The only thing I gave a fuck about at 11 years old was trying to find the next installment of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga series, which I could not find in any Barnes & Noble that I went to. I couldn't even find it at the library. Like, instead of maybe asking us as a student body what about high school and adulthood made us nervous, or that we maybe need help navigating, they just pulled a coach card.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
We did not talk about the root cause of substance abuse or addiction. As far as we were led to believe, it was just something that affected non-Christians that would never affect us in our lives in any way. The ultimate through line was that the only drug you need is Jesus, the only drink you need is God, and the only parties you need are youth group. I did go to youth group for a hot minute, by the way, because I wanted to hang out with my friend who had her own regular youth group. I stopped going when the youth group leader told us that unless we made humanitarian donations through the church as tithes, God don't see it. What you like in that too is that if you do that without putting God in the middle, in order for it to go through him, that you're basically throwing your money in the trash, and like, I don't fuck with that. I'm not gonna lie, that is something I don't fuck with. In the 7th grade, the social issue we got yelled at about was sex.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
That was our comprehensive sex ed talk. It was given by our teacher, who was twice divorced and took the concept of religious zealotry as a challenge. Here is a paraphrased list of the things that she told us. Cool, Ruth. Thanks for that. Then, in an hours-long class of this, she somehow found the time to squeeze in an incredibly broad, lazy lesson about human anatomy. Awesome use of your teaching degree, by the way. Really cool.
Oh, by the way, I was being sarcastic.
Ultimately, this was less of a sex education lesson and more of an emotional torture session to tell us that we need to marry Christian men and raise as many Christian babies as possible because God needs an army to defeat all the non-believers. I'm not joking. Those are real words that she said to us. The period between 7th and 8th grade is a little hazy, only because there's a significant amount of overlap in regard to queerness and sexual purity that we got taught in that time. Because in the same lecture where she tells us that women and girls should be overjoyed to be oppressed, she stresses the issue of sexual purity and also tells us the story about how a student that she had a few years ago had come out to her. The student came out to her saying that she thought she was gay and asked our teacher not to say anything to anyone. Our teacher then thanked her for her honesty and then immediately broke that trust after promising she wouldn't say anything and called the girl's parents into a meeting with both her and the principal in order to discuss the kind of spiritual danger that she put the other students in being in class while gay. Those were real words that she used, spiritual danger. I will never forget the way that she ended that anecdote, which was to say that she was proud to have done this, even though she never heard from or saw that girl ever again. I have never been more afraid in my life of an adult than I was in that moment. Like, imagine feeling such a sense of safety and trust with a teacher that you may not even have with your own parents, and she immediately betrays that trust, endangers you, and says that she was proud to do it. You want to talk about demonic behavior? That's demonic behavior. But both of these carry over into the split classes that we had in the 8th grade, which were about gay people and virginity. So the way that this worked is that we got split into girls and boys, again. But instead of having one long-ass class to talk about this, they split it into 2 slightly shorter classes and then had us rotate one to the other. I don't know. The first one that I had, because they split us and put us on a rotation, was about gay people. My teacher gave us a handout on which we took all of these notes that we were supposed to keep and internalize, and then he took it back at the end of class and then never gave it back, which I always thought was weird, but you know. I can't remember every single thing on the note sheet, but I do remember a few things really specifically in regards to the fear-mongering and scare tactics. He said that gay people are gay because they were sexually abused and that gay people seek to abuse others the way that they were abused as children. Therefore, Christians should never interact with a gay person unless we're trying to get them to repent and convert because they're going to brainwash us into repeating the cycle of sexual abuse. This statement alone was wild to me because all but one of the people who groomed and exploited me as a child were all men, and that didn't impact my being able to feel attracted to men or women. It had a heavy, heavy impact on the kind of men and women that I'm attracted to, but not the ability for me to be attracted to men and women at all. He then used that as a lead-in to talk about HIV statistics and claimed that HIV is a disease that primarily affects gay people, and the only reason straight people have HIV is because gay people gave it to them, which isn't true at all. Even though I planned on not saying anything during class because I found the whole concept of what we were doing to be ridiculous, that was when I opened my mouth. I raise my hand and I go, "Are you sure?" Because the CDC said that more people get HIV from using needle drugs than gay sex. I didn't say it quite so eloquently because I was 13, but I had seen statistics published by the CDC relatively recently to when we had that class, so I knew he was bullshitting. My teacher just stared at me in silence for a solid 30 seconds and then went, "Anyway, if your position is so weak that you short circuit at the first softball question that pushes back on it, is it really the right one to have?" I think this one is deceptive because HIV does disproportionately affect queer people, at least in the US, but that does not constitute proof of the claim that HIV is a weapon gay people use against straight people. Another thing I really clearly remember is when he talked about Sodom and Gomorrah and the story of Lot and his family. In Genesis 19, angels come to Lot as a godly man, and he insists that they stay in his home. As a result, it is written in Genesis 19 that men and boys of the town gathered around his house and demanded to see the men who visited him so that they could have sex with them. My teacher then proudly proclaims that Lot refused to let the man in, and instead offered his 2 virgin daughters, saying in Genesis 19:8, "Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." I thought, why are we praising this man for essentially throwing 2 of his daughters to the wolves? Why are we just glossing over that? Isn't sexual purity important? Why was it so meaningless to Lot, as their father, to throw his 2 daughters to an entire town of sex pests just so he could protect the 2 beings with the power of God? Why was that okay? It really fucked me up that on one hand we were being taught that our fathers essentially owned our bodies and were the sole arbiter of what we did with them, but on the other hand it was acceptable for them to use our bodies as bargaining chips to win favor with other men. That's not okay. That's not right, that's demonic behavior. Then the next one that we had to do was the class on the importance of sexual purity and maintaining our virginity. That was one that I just fully tuned out of. I just didn't give a shit, because at that point in the day, I was like, this is all bullshit, and I do not care to hear any more of it. She was hitting us with a bunch of scare tactics about STDs, and having children out of wedlock, and divorce rates, and I was just like,
Bart, not into it.
She was also hitting us with a bunch of scare tactics about maintaining purity and how Christian men want pure Christian wives, and I was, again, just thinking,
Bart, not into it.
I do remember that at the end of it all, we had to write an essay about how virginity is important, and that we understand that we need to respect God, our fathers, and our future husbands. Fuck our moms, I guess. I mean, they gave birth to us, but fuck them. I was so fed up with it that I couldn't even waste the effort to be sarcastic. I just wrote down what I thought she wanted to hear and stopped writing when the bell rang. I also remember that she gave us some kind of agreement or some sort of card that we had to sign to promise that we would remain abstinent until marriage, and that we had to give it back to her. We didn't even give it to our parents. We gave it to her. I just took it home and didn't bring it back, and she didn't ask for it, so I was like, cool. The truly upsetting thing is how easily this kind of spiritual fear-mongering works. The world is a very scary place full of phenomena and things that people just don't understand yet. And when bad things happen, like natural disasters, economic downturns, violent crimes like mass shootings, and the general horror of every day-to-day life, you want someone to tell you how to protect yourself and how to fix it. American culture from the outset of colonization has been so deeply soaked in Christianity that when a Christian influencer like Nick gives you a seemingly clear pathway to peace and safety, that you feel like it's just natural to do what they say. Anxiety, paranoia, and depression feel seemingly inescapable. I know that because I experience them on a daily basis. You end up asking yourself questions like, what if I'm not doing enough? What if I'm doing too much? Am I a bad person? Am I a good person? How do I find the answer to any of those questions? It is comforting and understandable to feel like religion and spirituality can give you some kind of pathway to finding mental and emotional peace. But what Nick and others like him are doing is not that. They are exploiting your anxiety, fear, and sadness in order to enrich their own sense of self. Nick makes no concrete argument as to what the fuck he's talking about. He just says a lot of scary words and puts scary images in your mind to trigger that fear response of helplessness so that he can keep you to watch his content. More people watching his content means more attention. More attention means more sponsorships from advertisers, which ultimately means more money in his pocket. I don't blame kids for being so afraid of the world that they fall into this. Either they feel so out of control of the world around them that they find true solace in what they're being told, or their parents' voices are so loud that they can't hear anything else. In an environment of increasing hopelessness about climate change, civil rights, or even just the possibility of them having a future in the next 5 years feel bleak. Believe me, as somebody who has lived through years of multiple economic recessions, hundreds of mass violent events, and catastrophic natural disasters, as well as the pandemic, I get it. Nick, however, is a grown man. He either doesn't have the intellectual curiosity to actually think critically about why he claims to believe what he believes, or he actively chooses to disregard it, instead to take further advantage of people. Grow up. Despite the fact that there is empirical evidence from peer-reviewed studies and scholarship to rival his claims, he just barrels through as though they don't exist. Because to him and others like him, they don't. Reality doesn't matter to them. All that matters is how they can twist and contort it and scare you into doing what they say, which in my opinion is spiritual abuse at its finest. All in all, Nick is not a man of substance. He spent about 3 minutes of a 10-minute video making faces and trying to scare you into giving him more attention. I lived through the kind of daily, ever-present anxiety and fear that he asks his audience to develop. I never want to live that life again, and I don't want to see anyone else live that life either. When I see people like Nick make this content with shameless and reckless abandon, it's infuriating because it's ultimately not about religion. It's about control and craving the power that comes with it. People like Nick walk this earth with hearts and minds full of hatred and anger that they can't control the people around them. In this video, the reason that Nick gives for demanding that you give him that control is fear. With that, I leave you with Matthew 7:15-23. I can quote the Bible too. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out the demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for tomorrow, when it'll be tomorrow.